Picture this. Wholesale vegetable prices skyrocketing by 30% overnight. American families paying hundreds more per month for basic groceries. And entire industries grinding to a halt because their workforce has vanished. This isn't some dystopian future. This is happening right now in America under Donald Trump's second presidency. And the most shocking part is that these aren't unintended consequences. They're the direct result of three specific policies that even Trump's own supporters are beginning to question. Policies so controversial that his approval rating has plummeted to just 38%, according to the latest Pew Research data from August 2025, making this the lowest approval rating of his second term. And if you think that's concerning, wait until you hear what's actually driving these numbers, because what I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how you view the current administration's approach to governing America. The first policy that's causing massive disruption across the country is Trump's unprecedented tariff war. But this isn't your typical trade dispute. Trump has imposed emergency tariffs on imports from Canada, Mexico, and China, citing extraordinary threats posed by illegal aliens and drugs, and has even extended these to countries like El Salvador with a 10% reciprocal tariff. And while the administration frames these as necessary security measures, the reality on the ground tells a very different story, because more Americans disapprove than approve of the Trump administration's tariff increases, according to Pew Research. And there's a very good reason for this widespread disapproval that goes far beyond political partisanship. These tariffs are functioning as a hidden tax on American consumers, forcing companies to pass increased costs directly to families who are already struggling with inflation. And the impact is being felt most severely in essential sectors like food and energy, where American households have no choice but to pay whatever price is demanded, creating a regressive tax system where working-class families bear the heaviest burden, while wealthy Americans can easily absorb the additional costs. What makes this policy particularly dangerous is that it's being implemented without congressional approval through executive emergency declarations, with 51% of U.S. adults saying Trump is setting too much policy via executive order, essentially bypassing the democratic process and concentrating unprecedented power in the executive branch. And when you combine this concentration of power with the economic devastation these tariffs are causing, you start to understand why economists across the political spectrum are sounding alarm bells about the long-term damage to America's economic foundation. The second policy creating widespread controversy is Trump's mass deportation program, which goes far beyond traditional immigration enforcement and ventures into territory that many legal experts are calling constitutionally questionable. And while immigration enforcement typically enjoys some public support, the Trump administration's overall approach to immigration is viewed more negatively than positively, with 42% approving and 47% disapproving. And specifically, 61% of Americans disapprove of deporting immigrants to a prison in El Salvador, which represents a dramatic shift in how immigration policy is being conducted. What makes this policy particularly alarming is not just the scale. We're talking about the largest deportation operation in American history, but the methods being employed, including deportation flights to nations possibly under tariff and other threats from the U.S. where immigrants are detained without regular access to counsel, family communication, or identity documents, which may violate immigrants' rights. And this represents a fundamental departure from due process protections that have been cornerstone principles of American justice for centuries. The economic impact of this policy is already becoming apparent, with wholesale vegetable prices skyrocketing and economic slowdowns in Texas as industries that rely on immigrant workers face severe labor shortages. And this isn't just affecting agricultural sectors, but construction, hospitality, healthcare support services, and numerous other industries that form the backbone of American economic activity, creating a ripple effect that's raising prices for consumers while simultaneously reducing economic productivity. Perhaps most concerning is how this policy is being implemented through emergency declarations and executive orders that concentrate enormous power in federal agencies, allowing for rapid deportations without the traditional legal safeguards that protect both citizens and non-citizens from government overreach. And when you consider that immigration status can be complex and documentation can be lost or disputed, the potential for American citizens to be caught up in these sweeps becomes a very real constitutional crisis waiting to happen. The third policy generating massive opposition is Trump's systematic dismantling of environmental protections, which represents the most aggressive rollback of environmental regulations in modern American history. And experts have identified numerous anti-environment policies enacted in Trump's first 100 days, including cuts to extreme weather preparedness, frozen investments, and block pollution protections. But what makes this particularly dangerous is the timing and scope of these. Change is coming at a moment when climate change impacts are intensifying across the United States. Trump's EPA is not just rolling back specific regulations, but is attempting to eliminate climate pollution limits on fossil fuel power plants altogether, and is even challenging the fundamental scientific finding that greenhouse gases endanger public health, which represents an unprecedented rejection of scientific consensus and established regulatory frameworks that have protected American air and water quality for decades. The immediate impacts of these rollbacks are already being felt in communities across America, where air quality standards are being relaxed just as extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and severe, creating a perfect storm where Americans are exposed to higher levels of pollution precisely when their bodies are under additional stress from heat waves, storms, and other climate-related health challenges. What makes this policy particularly insidious is how it disproportionately affects vulnerable populations, children, elderly Americans, and communities that are already dealing with environmental justice issues, while providing economic benefits primarily to large corporations that can externalize their pollution costs onto the general public, essentially privatizing profits while socializing health and environmental costs. Congress has approved most of Trump's environmental rollback demands, including voting to repeal much of the Inflation Reduction Act, a package of pro-environment spending that included many projects in Republican districts, which means that even communities that voted for Trump are losing investments in clean energy and environmental protection that would have provided jobs and economic benefits. The long-term consequences of this policy extend far beyond any single presidential term because environmental damage can be irreversible, and the regulatory frameworks being dismantled took decades to develop and implement, meaning that even if future administrations want to restore these protections, the damage to both the environment and the institutional capacity to address environmental challenges may be permanent. What makes all three of these policies particularly dangerous is how they work together to concentrate power in the executive branch while reducing democratic accountability and oversight, creating a governing system that operates more through executive decree than through the constitutional system of checks and balances that has protected American democracy for over 2 centuries. Trump's current job approval rating stands at 38%, with 60% of U.S. adults expressing disapproval, and his net approval has dropped 14 points since his inauguration, indicating that Americans are recognizing the real-world impacts of these policies and rejecting this approach to governance. The economic impacts alone, from tariff-induced inflation to labor shortages, from mass deportations to the cost of environmental degradation, are creating a perfect storm that threatens American prosperity and competitiveness. While the constitutional impacts of governing through emergency declarations and executive orders threaten the fundamental democratic institutions that have made America a model for the world, perhaps most troubling is how these policies create self-reinforcing cycles of crisis and executive power expansion, where economic disruption and social tension create justifications for even more extreme measures. And when you combine this with a systematic dismantling of regulatory oversight and environmental protections, you get a governing approach that prioritizes short-term political gains over long-term American interests and values. The data from multiple polling organizations shows that Americans across party lines are beginning to recognize these dangers, with disapproval ratings climbing even among independents and some Republicans who supported Trump in the election, but are now witnessing the real-world consequences of these policies in their daily lives. From higher grocery prices to environmental degradation to constitutional concerns about the concentration of executive power. What makes this moment particularly crucial is that these policies are not just policy disagreements. They represent fundamental changes to how America operates as a democracy and as an economy, changes that will have lasting impacts far beyond any single election cycle, and the window for course correction is rapidly closing as these policies become more entrenched and their effects become more severe and irreversible, which is why understanding the full scope and implications of these three dangerous policies is essential for every American who cares about the future of our country and our democratic institutions.